Petrophysics Daily, your daily petrophysics guide.
Oh, imagine this. You're drilling a $50 million well.
Right, a huge investment.
Huge. And you're basing this all on what looks like just flawless fluid data. I mean, perfect.
Okay.
But then you realize, way too late, that the actual rock framework, rock miles underground, it can't yield a single drop of that fluid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a nightmare scenario.
It really is. I mean, multi-million-dollar interpretations collapse all the time. And the fascinating reality is that it almost always comes down to a failure to balance a very specific set of variables.
Yeah, exactly. Welcome to this deep dive, everyone, because if you're joining us, you already know the subsurface is incredibly unforgiving.
Very unforgiving.
So today we're taking a highly concentrated technical carousel from a Field Guide to the Subsurface, issue 003.
Right.
Which, pulls its foundational DNA directly from Chapter 1 of the 2016 Elsevier textbook, Petrophysics.
It's a great foundation.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we're looking at how to actually read the story hidden deep underground.
Yeah.
Right? Like stripping away all the noise to find out what is actually down there.
Yeah, and it's a critical mission because the subterranean world, it does not yield its secrets easily.
No, it definitely doesn't.
So the central theme we are pulling from the text today is that in petrophysics, the truth is, it's never found in a single isolated measurement.
Right. You can't just look at one thing.
Exactly. You cannot rely on one log signature or just one fluid sample to paint the entire picture. The reality of the subsurface exists in this really delicate, I'd say non-negotiable balancing act.
And the source has a specific name for this, right?
Yeah, it formally defines this as the rock fluid data triangle.
The rock fluid data triangle, okay.
Right. And this is basically the core operating system for everything we are analyzing today. If you fail to balance this triangle, your understanding of the subsurface doesn't just, degrade slightly.
Does it just get a little blurry?
No, it completely collapses. It
Yeah.
falls into a state of just unquantifiable uncertainty.
And a total collapse is obviously a catastrophic scenario.
Yeah.
Especially when you are dealing with, capital-intensive energy projects or carbon sequestration sites.
Exactly. The stakes are massive.
Right. So to prevent that collapse, we really have to deconstruct this triangle and examine why its three corners, which are rock properties, fluid behavior, and measured data, why they're so structurally codependent. Okay, let's unpack this by moving away from simple analogies for a second and maybe looking at it like the architecture of a massive subterranean skyscraper.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
I think an architectural framework is the right way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
Definitely. If we apply that to the source materials requirement that a reliable interpretation connects these three components, we can actually assign them really specific roles.
Okay, so let's break that down. What's the rock in this building?
So the rock is your load-bearing structure. It is the steel and concrete framework of the building.
Got it. The physical bones.
Right? The physical bones. And then the fluid, that represents the plumbing.
Okay.
It's the active, dynamic systems flowing through that rigid structure.
Right. The water in the pipes.
Exactly. And then you have the measured data. That represents the architectural blueprints and the sensory feedback we receive from the building's diagnostic systems.
So if you have this massive steel framework, the rock, and you've mapped out the fluid dynamics, the plumbing perfectly, but your sensory data, like your blueprints, are completely outdated or flawed, the building is still fundamentally unsafe to occupy.
Absolutely. It's dangerous.
Like you might think you know where the water is flowing, but without accurate data actually confirming it, you're just guessing.
You're completely guessing. And the source text is aggressively clear about this. It states, and this is a quote, "Strong petrophysical interpretation balances rock, fluid, and data."
It doesn't say mostly balances.
Right. It doesn't suggest that having incredible rock samples somehow makes up for really poor log data. It demands complete equilibrium.
And why is that equilibrium so strict? I mean, why can't we just lean heavily on the two strong legs of the stool?
The requirement for equilibrium is absolute because of how the text treats uncertainty.
Okay.
If even one corner of this rock fluid data triangle is weak, the entire interpretation must carry a flag of uncertainty.
A flag of uncertainty. That's a strong phrase.
It is, and this is where a lot of analysts really struggle because, there is this immense psychological pressure in this industry to just deliver definitive answers.
Oh, sure. Management wants a yes or a no. They don't want maybe.
Exactly. But true scientific rigor demands that we explicitly flag an interpretation as uncertain if the data corner is compromised.
Even if the rock looks great.
Even if the rock and fluid models look absolutely pristine on a computer screen.
Right. And that friction between the physical rock and the measured data is exactly why integration is such a challenging process for you or anyone navigating these complex geological models.
Yeah, it's never easy.
Because when we look at complex systems, ignoring a weak pillar of information, it always leads to false confidence.
Always.
We see teams fall in love with this beautiful porosity model derived from, like, a pristine core sample.
Oh, I've seen it happen so many times.
Right. And they completely gloss over the fact that their downhole measurement data is noisy, or maybe it's compromised by borehole washouts. They just project certainty where none actually exists.
They fall right into the trap of confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And the triangle is specifically designed to be a defense mechanism against that unwarranted confidence.
It forces you to confront the ugly data.
It forces the interpreter to confront the weakest link in their logic. If your, log data is telling a fundamentally different story than your rock framework, you cannot just average the two.
Right, you can't just split the difference.
No, or ignore the anomaly. You have to investigate the discrepancy.
So to actually investigate those discrepancies, we have to look closely at the physical realities buried, thousands of feet down.
Right.
The triangle is the overarching philosophy.
Yeah.
But the source text gives us two tangible physical controls as our very first interpretation checks.
Which are the rock and the fluid.
Exactly. So let's start there.
Let's focus on the physical architecture first. The text explicitly states that the rock controls the physical framework through three primary attributes.
Okay, and those are...
Lithology, fabric, and pore systems.
Lithology, that's just the type of rock, right?
Right, the mineral composition. Like, are we dealing with sandstone, limestone, dolomite, or shale?
Got it. And fabric?
The fabric is how those mineral grains are actually arranged and oriented within the rock.
Okay, how they stack together.
Exactly. And then the pore system is the actual architecture of the void spaces within that rock.
The empty space.
The empty space, right.
The visualization of this in the carousel source material is actually really striking.
It's a great image.
It is. It shows this microscopic cross-sectional view of the rock matrix. You have these yellow, somewhat irregular shapes tightly packed together. And those are the solid rock grains, right?
Yeah.
The physical structure.
Exactly, the solid framework.
But winding through and between all those solid yellow grains is this complex network of blue.
Yeah.
And the blue represents the pore space and the fluid filling those microscopic gaps. The text uses a great phrase here, actually. It calls the pore system where the space comes from.
What's fascinating here is how that visual perfectly highlights the symbiotic nature of the subsurface.
Symbiotic how?
Well, the solid rock grains the yellow in your visual. They provide the rigid boundaries.
Right.
They are the unyielding container. But the blue void space, that is where the dynamic action actually happens.
Where the fluids are.
Right. The fluids, whether they're saline water, oil, or natural gas, they provide the dynamic behavior through saturation.
Okay.
And the source stresses that an interpretation only gains strength when these two controls, the static rock framework and the dynamic fluid saturation, are analyzed simultaneously.
Okay, I want to push back on that sequence for a moment, actually.
Sure, jump in.
Because if I am modeling a reservoir, the fluid is ultimately the prize, right?
Of course.
Whether it's hydrocarbons we want to produce or saline aquifers we want to inject carbon into the fluid behavior is the economic driver.
That's where the money is.
Exactly. So why does the text insist so rigidly that the physical rock framework has to be the primary check? Like, why can't we prioritize the dynamic behavior first if that's what we actually care about? Let's use a sponge analogy.
Okay, Spud.
Yeah. I care about the water in the sponge, not the sponge itself.
Right. The instinct to focus on the fluid is completely natural because it is the economic variable, but it defies the physics of the subsurface.
Helps with
because the fluid cannot act independently of the rock framework.
Okay.
Think of it like a highly complex industrial filtration system instead of a sponge.
Oh, a filter.
Right. If you want to know how quickly a viscous fluid will move through a filter or how much fluid that filter can hold, you can't just study the fluid in a vacuum.
Right, just looking at the oil won't tell me how it flows.
Exactly. The internal geometry of the filter, the size of the microscopic pathways, the tortuosity of those paths, even the chemical reactivity of the filter material, all of that dictates entirely how the fluid will behave.
Ah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. The geometry of the container governs the behavior of the contents.
Yes.
So we're looking at, say, a classic sandstone reservoir,
Mm-hmm.
where the pore spaces are between relatively uniform grains of sand. The fluid will move very differently than it would in a carbonate reservoir,
Completely different.
like a vuggy limestone, where the
Yeah.
pore spaces might be massive. Irregular cavities created by dissolution over millions of years.
Exactly. And that right there is why the text mandates that the rock is the first control.
You have to know the filter.
You have to. If you attempt to interpret fluid saturation from a well log without first establishing whether you are looking at an intergranular sandstone or fractured carbonate, well, your fluid interpretation has absolutely no physical grounding.
It's just a guess.
It's totally unmoored. The capillary pressure, the relative permeability, the way water clings to the surface of the rock grains, all of these fluid dynamics are governed directly by the lithology and the pore system.
Okay, so we established the rock as the structural container and the fluid as the dynamic contents.
Right.
But here is the massive logistical hurdle for you, the listener, or anyone trying to do this. This container and its contents are 3 miles underground.
Yeah, subjected to immense heat and pressure.
Right. We are dealing with a totally remote environment. We can't just excavate the formation and drop it onto a lab bench to look at it.
No, unfortunately not.
So how do we actually extract meaning from an environment we cannot directly see?
Well, that is what brings us to the third crucial corner of our triangle, the data.
The data, okay.
We have to rely on remote sensing and physical extraction, which the source quite eloquently frames as different measurement windows.
Different measurement windows. I like that.
Yeah. Because the subterranean landscape is inaccessible in its entirety, we use core samples and well logs to open these narrow windows into the formation.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about the mechanical reality of a measurement window.
Right.
We're drilling a hole that might be only, 8 or 9 inches in diameter?
Sometimes even less.
Right, and we're drilling it thousands of feet deep into the earth. And then we are lowering highly sensitive instruments down this tiny dark keyhole, and we're asking those instruments to somehow map the vast geological formations surrounding the borehole.
Yeah, it is a staggering feat of physics and engineering.
It really is.
It is a remarkable technological achievement, but it introduces a massive layer of complexity.
How so?
Well, this is exactly why the source text draws a very hard, definitive line between the types of evidence we gather from these windows. It separates direct evidence from interpreted evidence.
Direct versus interpreted.
Yes. And as petrophysicists, or really anyone analyzing this data, blurring the line between those two categories is the fastest way to collapse an interpretation.
Okay, let's define those boundaries clearly. Why is the distinction between direct and interpreted evidence so vital to the integrity of the whole triangle?
Because direct evidence is the physical, unfiltered reality of the subsurface.
Okay, give me an example.
If you cut a core sample, literally a cylindrical piece of the rock formation, you bring it to the surface and you hold it in your hands.
Right.
You are interacting with direct evidence. You can physically see the lithology. You can put it under a microscope and physically measure the fabric and the pore system.
There's no guesswork.
Exactly. It is tangible proof of the physical framework.
But the reality is, coring an entire well is, it's economically and operationally impossible in most cases. Right?
Oh, completely impossible.
You might get, 100 feet of core in a well that is 10,000 feet deep?
If you're lucky.
Right. So for the rest of the well, we have to rely on interpreted evidence.
Precisely. Interpreted evidence is our attempt to translate indirect measurements into a cohesive understanding of the rock and fluid.
So it's a translation.
It is. This relies heavily on well logs, complex integrated models, and laboratory measurements that are calibrated against those logs. The well log does not give you a piece of rock.
Yet.
It gives you a physical measurement of the environment, which you must then interpret.
Right. And the source text points out a specific alphabet of common well log measurements that act as the foundation for this interpreted evidence.
Yes, the classic suite.
Right. We have GR, RES, DN, NPHI, and SUN.
Exactly.
We need to unpack what these downhole signatures are actually doing because they are the raw data feeding the third corner of our triangle. They're literally the language the instruments speak.
That's a great way to put it.
So let's start with GR, the gamma ray log. What is that telling us?
The gamma ray log is one of the most fundamental tools we have for establishing that very first check the rock framework.
Okay.
It measures the naturally occurring radioactivity in the formation.
Radioactivity, like uranium and stuff.
Exactly. Different rocks contain different levels of radioactive isotopes like potassium, uranium, and thorium.
Oh, okay.
So shales and clays tend to have high concentrations of these isotopes, which means they emit higher levels of gamma radiation.
And what about the good rocks, like the reservoirs?
Clean sandstones and carbonates typically have very low levels of radiation.
Ah, so as the tool is pulled up the borehole, a high GR signature tells us we are likely looking at a shale layer,
Right.
while a low GR signature indicates we have probably moved into a sandstone or limestone reservoir rock.
Exactly.
So it's essentially a proxy for lithology.
It is a proxy, exactly. And that's the key word. It is not a direct observation of a sandstone grain. It is an interpretation based on the absence of natural radiation.
Right, we're guessing it's sandstone because it's not radioactive.
Exactly. That is the very essence of interpreted evidence.
Okay, that makes sense. So next on the text list is RES, or resistivity.
The big one.
Right. If the gamma ray log is primarily helping us define the rock framework, the resistivity log is our heavy hitter for understanding the fluid behavior, right? The second corner of the triangle.
Yes. Resistivity logging is just a brilliant application of physics.
How does it work?
The tool induces an electrical current directly into the rock formation, and then it measures how strongly the formation resists the flow of that current.
Okay, so it's measuring resistance.
Right. And the key here is that the rock matrix itself, the solid part, is generally an insulator.
Oh, so the rock doesn't conduct electricity well.
Exactly. The electrical conductivity is almost entirely dictated by the fluids trapped in the pore spaces.
And this is where the economic stakes come in, don't they?
Absolutely.
Because formation water, which is essentially just deep subterranean brine, is highly conductive because of all the dissolved salts.
Very conductive.
But hydrocarbons like oil and natural gas, they are electrical insulators. They resist the current.
Which means, if our gamma ray log indicates we are in a clean, porous sandstone,
Low radiation.
right, and our resistivity log suddenly shoots up, showing very high resistance to the electrical current.
Then we have a very strong interpreted indicator that the pore spaces are filled with hydrocarbons rather than saline water.
Exactly. We are interpreting the fluid behavior by measuring its electrical properties.
That's incredible. But the text also lists DEN and NPHI, density and neutron porosity.
Right, because we don't just want to know if oil is there. We need to know how much is there.
Right. We need to know the volume, which means we need to know the exact volume of the pore space. How do these density and neutron tools give us that data?
Well, the bulk density log, or DN, operates by emitting gamma rays into the formation from a chemical source on the tool itself.
So it's shooting radiation into the rock.
Yes, and these gamma rays collide with the electrons in the rock formation in a process called Compton scattering.
Compton scattering, okay.
Right. By measuring how many gamma rays bounce back to the detectors on the tool, we can actually determine the electron density of the formation.
Which correlates to the bulk density.
Exactly. It correlates directly to its bulk density.
So a really dense rock with very little pore space will scatter more gamma rays back to the tool.
Because there's more rock mass.
Right. Whereas a highly porous rock filled with lighter fluids will have a lower bulk density, so fewer bounce back.
Correct. And then the neutron porosity log, NPHI, it takes a slightly different approach.
What does that one do?
It bombards the formation with fast-moving neutrons.
Okay.
These neutrons lose energy primarily when they collide with hydrogen atoms.
Hydrogen. And water is H2O. Hydrocarbons are full of hydrogen.
Exactly. Because hydrogen is a primary component of both water and hydrocarbons, the neutron log is essentially a hydrogen index.
Oh, that's clever.
Very. By measuring how many neutrons are slowed down and captured, we can estimate the volume of fluid-filled pore space.
Wow. And finally, the text mentions SON, the sonic log.
Yeah.
This is acoustics, right? Measuring the speed of sound through the rock.
Yes, exactly. The sonic log measures the acoustic transit time, basically how fast a sound wave travels through the formation.
Okay, and why does that help us?
Because sound travels much faster through a solid rock matrix than it does through the fluids in the pore spaces.
Okay.
By measuring this transit time, we get another totally independent estimation of porosity, and crucially, it helps us understand the mechanical properties of the rock itself.
So we have this whole suite of advanced tools generating GR, RES, DRAN, NPHI, and Sun signatures.
Right.
This is the third corner of our triangle, the data.
The blueprint.
Exactly. But a signature on a log is not the rock itself, and it is not a barrel of oil.
No, it's not.
It is a highly complex physical measurement of a response. It is a piece of interpreted evidence that must be painstakingly integrated with whatever direct rock evidence we have and our models of fluid behavior.
And that integration, frankly, is the most difficult phase of petrophysics.
I can imagine.
When you are looking at a computer screen displaying multiple log curves and you're overlaying core data and fluid saturation models, the sheer volume of data is overwhelming.
It's a lot of noise.
It is. The subsurface is chaotic. The data is inherently noisy. The borehole itself might be degraded, which affects the density readings.
Right, if the hole isn't a perfect cylinder.
Exactly. The drilling mud might have invaded the pore spaces, which alters the resistivity readings.
So this brings us to a really critical juncture for you as the listener trying to synthesize all this. When you are faced with a mountain of conflicting signals, like a gamma ray log suggesting one lithology, a core sample suggesting another, and a resistivity log that seems completely anomalous, how do you actually make sense of it without letting your own biases dictate the outcome?
That is the big question. And the answer is you must implement a disciplined, completely inflexible sequence of review.
Inflexible.
Yes. Without a rigidly defined review path, human beings naturally gravitate toward the data points that support their preconceived hypotheses.
Oh, sure.
If you are looking for oil, you will subconsciously focus on the high resistivity spikes, and you'll just ignore the density data that suggests the rock is totally impermeable.
You'll see what you want to see.
Exactly. So the source guide provides a very specific sequence to prevent this.
Right. The guide lays out a source-based sequence that assigns descending percentages to 4 specific interpretation controls to keep the workflow traceable.
Right. It's a hierarchy.
It lists rock at 92%, fluid at 84%, data at 76%, and integration at 68%.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, those percentages are not just arbitrary grades like you'd get on a test.
Right. What are they?
They represent a fundamental hierarchy of foundational confidence. And more importantly, they illustrate how uncertainty compounds as you move further away from direct physical reality.
Okay, let's break down that cascade of uncertainty. Why does the text assign a 92% confidence level to the rock control? I mean, why isn't it 100% if the rock is our absolute physical baseline?
Because even with direct evidence, the subsurface retains a degree of unknowability.
Oh, okay.
Think about it. Even if you have a physical core sample in a laboratory, that core is, what, a 4-inch diameter cylinder?
Right.
But it's supposed to represent a geological formation that might stretch for hundreds of square miles.
Ah, I see.
The rock fabric is heterogeneous. It changes. So while the physical rock provides the highest possible baseline of truth, we must acknowledge an inherent 8% margin of uncertainty simply due to spatial limits.
We just can't measure every single inch of the rock.
Exactly. So 92% is our maximum attainable confidence.
Okay, so we establish our rock foundation at 92%. Then the sequence drops us to 84% for fluid.
Right.
Why do we lose another 8% of confidence when we add the fluid component?
Because fluid dynamics introduce a massive layer of interpretive complexity.
Okay.
You are no longer just looking at a static solid block. You are now modeling how liquids and gases interact within the microscopic capillary networks of that solid under extreme pressure and temperature.
That sounds incredibly complicated.
It is. The mathematical models we use to determine water saturation, like the Archie equation, they rely on assumptions.
Assumptions about what?
About the rock's electrical properties and the salinity of the formation water, among other things. And every single assumption degrades your absolute confidence.
Right.
So your confidence in the fluid behavior is fundamentally capped beneath your confidence in the rock framework.
That makes perfect logical sense. The fluid model is derived from the rock model, so it has to carry the rock's uncertainty plus its own uncertainty.
Exactly.
Okay, then we move to the third control, data, which drops further down to 76%.
Right. The drop to 76% for data really reflects the mechanical and environmental realities of well logging.
The messy reality of the borehole.
Yes. We just discussed the incredible physics of gamma ray, resistivity, and density tools, but those tools are operating in incredibly hostile environments.
Right, miles underground.
High temperatures can cause tool drift. Rough borehole walls can prevent the density tool from making good contact with the rock.
Oh, so the tool just isn't touching the wall properly?
Exactly. And the drilling mud itself can physically alter the near borehole environment. So the data is essential, yes, but it is inherently noisy and subject to mechanical error.
So we have this cascading chain of reliance. We have the rock at 92%, the fluid at 84%, and the data at 76%.
Yes.
And then we reach the final step of the sequence, integration, which sits at the very bottom with 68%. Now, this might seem totally counterintuitive at first glance to you listening. Shouldn't integrating all this information make us more confident, not less?
It's a common misconception.
Why does the final comprehensive view carry the lowest percentage of confidence in the hierarchy?
Because true integration is not about adding confidences together to somehow reach 100%.
Okay, then what is it?
Integration is an audit.
An audit.
It is the process of forcing these three separate domains, the physical rock, the dynamic fluid, and the remote data, to reconcile with one another.
And they don't always want to reconcile.
In a complex, chaotic system, they will never reconcile perfectly. There will always be friction.
Give me an example of that friction.
Well, the density log might suggest 15% porosity, right? But the core sample sitting on your desk shows 12%.
So they disagree.
Exactly. Or the resistivity might imply high hydrocarbon saturation, but the fluid models suggest the capillary pressure is just too low for hydrocarbons to migrate into that specific pore architecture.
Ah, so integration exposes the inconsistencies. It is the friction point.
Precisely. Integration highlights the gaps in our knowledge. The 68% represents the sobering reality of what remains when you strip away all the assumptions and you look at the points where the rock, fluid, and data actually conflict.
It's the honest truth.
Right. It is a highly realistic, defensible baseline of truth.
Wow. Okay, so to actually achieve this rigorous integration, the text gives us a practical 1, 2, 3 review path.
It does?
A procedural sequence that just forces discipline upon the interpreter. Step 1 is clearly stated. Look for source-backed evidence of the rock control before assigning meaning.
Before assigning meaning. That phrase is the intellectual anchor of this entire philosophy.
It really is profound because human beings are biologically wired to be storytelling machines, aren't we?
Oh, completely.
We abhor a vacuum of information. If we see an anomaly on a log, a sudden spike in resistivity, or a huge drop in density, our brains instantly race to construct a narrative. We want to assign meaning.
Right away.
I want to say, look at that crossover on the density neutron log. We found a massive gas cap.
It is the psychological phenomenon of pareidolia applied to data analysis.
Pareidolia, seeing faces in the cloud.
Exactly. We see patterns that confirm our desires. And if a team has spent months and millions of dollars drilling a well, the pressure to assign positive meaning to ambiguous data is immense.
And step 1 acts as a circuit breaker for that.
It does.
It demands that you stop and say, do not tell me a story about the fluid yet. Show me the rock.
Show me the rock, yes.
It forces the analyst to establish the physical architecture first. If you see a resistivity spike, before you assign the meaning of hydrocarbons, you must look at the rack data.
Exactly. Is this a tight, impermeable shale where the high resistivity is just a function of the rock matrix? Or is it actually a porous sandstone?
Right. You have to build a container before you can fill it.
Yes. Once the rock foundation is verified and you have satisfied step 1, you proceed to step 2.
Which is, test whether the fluid is consistent with the data.
Right. This is where the cross-examination happens.
Okay.
You take your fluid expectations, which are now grounded in verified rock properties, thanks to step 1, and you hold them up against the raw log signatures. Does the actual downhole data support the theoretical fluid behavior?
Okay, so if my rock model says I have a highly porous, permeable sandstone, and my fluid model suggests it should be filled with formation water, but my resistivity log is reading completely off the charts. The fluid is not consistent with the data.
Exactly. And that inconsistency triggers an investigation.
You don't just ignore it.
Never. You ask, is the resistivity tool malfunctioning? Did the drilling fluid invade the formation deeper than expected? Or is the rock actually filled with hydrocarbons, requiring a complete revision of the initial fluid model?
Right.
Step 2 forces the interpreter to resolve the conflict between expectation and actual measurement.
Which naturally leads to step 3. Document the role of integration so the conclusion remains traceable.
Traceability is everything.
Traceability is the ultimate goal here. You are leaving this meticulous breadcrumb trail of your logic documenting every time you had to reconcile a conflict between the rock, the fluid, and the data.
Right.
But the source text makes a fascinating philosophical point about the ultimate function of integration. It states that integration helps define what the interpretation can and, just as importantly, cannot claim.
This is a radical departure from how many people view data analysis.
Really? How so?
Well, we typically think of data integration as a generative process, right?
Yeah.
We integrate data to build bigger, bolder claims.
Yeah, to prove we found something huge.
Right. We synthesize a dozen data streams to claim absolute certainty about the reservoir volume. But this text argues that true integration is actually a limiting function.
It builds a fence around your interpretation.
It does. By forcing the rock, fluid, and data to confront each other, integration exposes the margins of error.
It shows you what you don't know.
Exactly. It forces the petrophysicists to stand up in a boardroom and say, based on the integration of these conflicting log responses and the limits of our core data, we cannot claim with certainty that this reservoir is connected to the adjacent field.
Which is probably not what the executives want to hear.
It's rarely what they want to hear. But integration defines the boundaries of your knowledge, preventing you from wandering out into the dangerous wilderness of pure speculation.
That is incredibly powerful for anyone dealing with data. Integration tells you exactly where your property line of truth ends.
Beautifully said.
But even with this rigorous 1, 2, 3 sequence, even with the understanding of cascading uncertainty, human nature is stubborn.
Oh, very stubborn.
The pressure for a clean, simple answer is unrelenting. And that pressure leads directly to the most dangerous hazard outlined in our text.
The shortcut that bypasses the entire triangle.
Exactly. Which brings us to Section 5 of our deep dive. The source issues an ultimate warning, printed in bold. Do not let one number carry the interpretation.
A critical warning.
The trap we fall into is taking this incredibly nuanced, physically complex rock fluid data triangle and just crushing it down into a single number metric.
This raises an important question. Why are technical disciplines, from petrophysics to economics to medicine, why are they so violently drawn to the single number?
Because complexity is exhausting.
It really is.
A single number fits neatly into a spreadsheet. It looks decisive on a PowerPoint slide presented to investors.
It provides the illusion of absolute control.
The illusion, yeah.
But the subsurface environment is violently heterogeneous. The rock fabric changes millimeter by millimeter. The fluid saturations transition dynamically across pressure gradients.
It's not uniform.
Not at all. When you try to summarize a complex geological formation with a single number, like saying average porosity is 12% or water saturation is 40%, you are stripping away all the physical context that gives that number its meaning and its limits.
Right.
The text warns us that a technical claim must remain strictly limited to what the controlling evidence actually supports. And the controlling evidence is an integrated web. It is never a lone statistic.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, whether you are analyzing subsurface data or really any complex system? You have to aggressively resist the institutional urge to oversimplify. Let's use an analogy that relies on human complexity rather than basic mechanics for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about the concept of a credit score. A credit score is the ultimate single number trap.
Oh, that's a great example. It is an attempt to quantify the totality of a person's financial reliability into just 3 digits.
Exactly. When a financial institution looks at a credit score, they're trying to summarize an entire, incredibly complex human life. They're using that single number to determine if you are responsible, if you suffered a medical bankruptcy a decade ago, if you just graduated and have no history, or if you are currently running a highly successful but, cash-heavy business.
Yes.
But that one number strips away all the physical reality of your actual circumstances. It completely loses the context of why a payment was missed or why a debt was leveraged.
The credit score analogy works so well because it highlights the sheer danger of lost context.
Right.
If a bank relies entirely on that single number, they will make wildly inaccurate assumptions. They'll end up rejecting solid investments and approving really risky ones.
Happens all the time.
Exactly. In petrophysics, however, the stakes are not just a denied loan. They are tens of millions of dollars and massive environmental implications.
Right.
If you plan a drilling operation based on a single number average for porosity, you might bypass a highly productive reservoir entirely just because you ignored the localized fractures in the rock.
Because the average hid them?
Right. Or you might drill right into a dry zone because you ignored the resistivity data that conflicted with your clean, simple average.
You lose the true story.
You lose the truth.
You have to rely on the integrated triangle. In the credit analogy, The rock is your actual structural life
The
circumstances,
foundation.
right? The fluid is your dynamic cash flow,
Yeah.
and the data is your documented payment history. You need all three to understand the reality. You cannot let a lone statistic carry the weight of the entire truth.
Which is exactly why the source provides one final, non-negotiable directive.
What's that?
Before you publish, present, or finalize any conclusion, you must perform a mandatory check. You must take your conclusion and manually verify it against the controlling evidence of the entire triangle.
No exception.
No exceptions. If your conclusion relies heavily on a single interpreted data point, say, a brilliant density log reading, but the physical rock framework and the fluid dynamics don't fully support that specific reading, you cannot publish that conclusion as a certainty.
You have to step back, rerun the 1, 2, 3 sequence, and find out where the equilibrium actually broke down.
Exactly.
You have to find out which part of the triangle is compromising the architecture. Man, we have covered a massive amount of physical and philosophical ground today, exploring the deep mechanics of how we translate the subsurface.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. So let's recap the core takeaway from our text. It is beautifully distilled into a central mantra: understand the rock, interpret the data.
It is the perfect summation of the discipline. The foundation must be understood physically, and the data must be interpreted carefully.
The goal of this deep dive wasn't just to list off logging acronyms or have you memorize the descending cascade of confidence percentages.
No, not at all.
The objective was to connect these conceptual frameworks back to the source evidence and really understand the mechanics behind them. As the text concludes, rocks tell a story. We learn to read it.
And as you continue to learn how to read those complex stories, I really want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We spent a significant amount of time today discussing how true integration is a limiting function, how it defines what we cannot claim, and exposes the boundaries of our knowledge.
Right.
If that rigorous integration is required to find the truth in petrophysics, consider the broader implications. How much of our established historical understanding of the world in economics, in sociology, and public policy is actually based on interpretations where someone let a single number carry the weight of a massive narrative?
Oh, wow.
How many widely accepted truths are built on a statistical data point that the underlying structural rock, the foundational reality of the situation, never actually supported?
Yeah.
By that is a thought that should change how you view every piece of data presented to you. Always check the foundational framework before you trust the numbers, folks. Thanks for listening to Petrophysics Daily. See you in the next chapter.